So this is just about 22:05 hours GMT, London, UK. And the idea of this edition is actually linked with the logistical issues that we have been having to deal with during the lockdown. The access to the print titles, which we examine and diagnose in this world exclusive KhoodeelaarTV Diagnosis of Fleet Street. Fleet Street meaning the London newspapers, also known wrongly as the national newspapers published from London, UK. And the reason why it's false and misleading and wrong to call these papers national is simple. Because the United Kingdom is the collective name for the various nations making up the so-called United Kingdom. And the so-called United Kingdom is so-called on the evidence that the United Kingdom's future is put at risk by the Brexiteers and the Brexit narrative. And one of the most notorious Brexiteers is the Little Englander from the so-called European Reform Group, ERG, the notorious corrupt and lying cabal of ultra-conservative lying MPs, fronted by the Dracula Rees-Mogg, the main Dracula of Westminster, Jacob Rees-Mogg. And they're now saying that even after the Brexit so-called agreement with the European Union, the part of the agreement about the Northern Irish component of the United Kingdom should be disregarded. So what they are saying is exactly what Matthew Hancock has said, the latest member of the Boris Johnson-fronted cabal, so-called cabinet, to defy the constitutionality and the legality and the obligations of the government under due process, under rule of law, and under international conventions and treaties that the United Kingdom still remains signatory and signed up to. So the United Kingdom is being openly disregarded and destroyed and undermined by the very people who said that after Brexit, the UK would be stronger in every respect. And Johnson repeatedly claimed that the United Kingdom would be fiercely protected and that the rights of the United Kingdom, people who are residents in and members of the Northern Ireland kind of society and constitutional component, would be defended and upheld at all costs. When Joe Biden in the USA was still waiting to be inaugurated, he suggested, or he made clear, although in brief kind of statements, his support for Northern Ireland and especially the Good Friday Agreement and the peace treaty that has resulted in the ceasefire, which has lasted now for almost 20 years. And the Brexiteering morons are now challenging in effect, the Good Friday Agreement and the ceasefire, and they're in effect declaring war on the streets of Northern Ireland again, or threatening to. or they're poised to. So this is the first edition of the day, Thursday, 25th of February 2021, in which the Khoodeelaar campaign carries out the world-exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. We don't say diagnosis of British politics. We say diagnosis of the British newspapers, collectively called Fleet Street papers or Fleet Street, for the simple reason that discussing and diagnosing Fleet Street is a wider scope than discussing just, quote, British politics that is based on the utterances and the lies and the fabrications and the corruption evident and embodied in and personified by the likes of Boris Johnson and his cabal. And his cabal definitely includes the ones that are now issuing new threats to the future of the United Kingdom, and especially defying the precious peace that was obtained by the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. And the evidence of the corruption and the lying and the violations of international obligations by the United Kingdom regime is more reliably accessed by looking at the contents of the Fleet Street papers, which are collectively agencies of the propaganda and the narrative and the agenda that suits the purpose of the Boris Johnson fronted cabal, whether it's including Jacob the Dracula Rees-Mogg or not including him as such. The purpose of this diagnosis, which we have been carrying out since July 2020, when we began broadcasting the KhoodeelaarTV Channel, is as follows. One is to do what we just outlined and summarized and updated. That is to examine the contents of the British politics, so-called, by looking at the narrative and the agenda as carried in the Fleet Street publications. And secondly, to show daily evidence, exact evidence by citation and reference, of the fact that poverty and denial of rights and denial of opportunities that are otherwise guaranteed according to the various international conventions and agreements that the UK remains signed up to. So we highlight those, and internationally we highlight, and we do that exclusively. That is to say, we do the original investigative research, and we find the evidence, and we share the evidence and share the conclusions on this program, as well as in other platforms of the Khoodeelaar campaign, especially focusing on the deliberate, the intentional, the otherwise avoidable creation, causation, causing of poverty and hunger and famine and destitution in the UK and in the rest of the world, and especially in those parts of the world in Africa from where, for example, the largest proportion of people are seeking to emigrate, migrate for better economic and human rights conditions they think are available and waiting for them to use and make use of and take advantage of and benefit from, mostly in Western European countries, including the UK, France, and Germany, but not limited to these countries, but including those three main ones. And in North America, which includes the United States of America and Canada. Now, the other thing we do quite apart from the daily diagnosis, as I have just summarized and outlined, is to provide a platform that is beyond the kind of scope of all the universities that are available, either in Western Europe, including the United Kingdom, North America, Canada, and the Western cultured rest of the world, including New Zealand and Australia, and parts of today's South Africa. So what we do is to look beyond universities. In other words, in terms of the scope of their inquiries, in terms of the scope of their studies, the universities have not even begun where we have been operating for decades. When I say we, I refer to the movement defending the community in the East End of London and the values upheld by the movement from the East End of London. So therefore it encompasses and includes and applies to the whole world of intellectual inquiries and evidence. And by intellectual, we include all the disciplines known today and up to today. And this goes back in historical terms and in terms of the kind of method and in terms of the scope and in terms of the test and the veracity kind of levels and the veracity tests we apply goes back thousands of years. And it includes, of course, the Greek greats, because they together constitute one very clear or clearly identifiable school and time and era. And the contents of their contribution is undisputable, indisputable, undeniable. And I, of course, refer to Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and their followers and disciples. And it goes back and forth. That is to say, before them and since them. So this is a channel which is broadcast online, and we intentionally don't invite kind of followers or friends. What we do is to provide the contents of what we broadcast. And the contents, by the nature of the technology, are available, accessible by various investigative methods, most popularly known as search engines and searches. So I'm Muhammad Haque, organizer of this program, presenter of this program, organizer of the movement defending the community in the East End of London, and organizer of the movement upholding the values of universality, transparency, ethics, morality, and accountability, universality from East End of London, but not confined to the East End of London. It transpires, it actually transcends the boundaries that are available anywhere. And we invite people who disagree with this factual series of assertions to make factual comments and contributions, and they can contact us by direct messages through Twitter. And the Twitter account is, of course, Khoodeelaar, following the mark, the Twitter mark, at Khoodeelaar, or twitter.com/Khoodeelaar. Khoodeelaar is spelled as here. We shall be repeating the spelling. And the Khoodeelaar is spelled Khoodeelaar, Khoodeelaar. And for this program, this channel, it is called KhoodeelaarTV, one word. So direct message. And we are concerning ourselves with the fact that a lot of so-called research done in the universities or at universities level, steal stuff. And the universities are doing the theft intentionally. No original contribution about any aspect of the state of the various intellectual disciplines, various evidence of the various communities and the various struggles and campaigns can be just invented. Every campaign, every idea, every analysis, every investigation, by the nature of the engagement of the event, requires time-consuming original work that cannot be created just like that by magic. It involves every aspect of life, human life, and it involves every value that is worth upholding. Every good value, every value that is opposed to darkness, singular or collective. And every value has to be attained, accessed, identified, affiliated to by engagement of total dedication to the truth over a period of time. It cannot be done by a period of days, weeks, or even months, or even years. So what you are watching here is the result of and is connected with ongoing, decades-long events and activities and engagements. And the ultimate aim and purpose is to bring about light and enlightenment and bring an end to the darkness and the priests and agents of darkness in every respect, in every field. This program has got platforms that actually refer to the Crossrail whole plot against Brick Lane in London, in the east end of London, in the UK. Because of space allowed by the various platforms, we only give a very bare kind of summary. But our engagement, our connection, our investigation, and our searches range from the local to the regional to the national, to the continental to the intercontinental. And for example, today, the Financial Times in London, today that is Thursday, the 25th of February 2021, the Financial Times has obviously in its own style, but significantly, undeniably, very seriously recognized the corruption and the corrupt mentality of Narendra Modi in India. Modi is, if you like, the most poisonous liar and pretender. Look at his kind of symbolic kind of raising of his arms on his head. That is appealing to the barest, brazenest emotions of the Brahminist ideology. And what the Financial Times is saying today, 25th of February 2021, is that Modi, well, it's not using the word disgraceful, that is what the Financial Times is meaning. Narendra Modi has disgraced himself by naming India's largest stadium after himself. So it's now Narendra Modi Stadium. No pretending there. This guy is beyond condemnation on the evidence. And he's disgracing the idea of democracy in India, which the Western media, especially Fleet Street and including Fleet Street, and unmistakably by Fleet Street, has been peddled as the world's biggest democracy. Well, the biggest, of course, applies to India in terms of the number of people, the number of people affected by starvation, hunger, and lack of liberty and lack of freedom, lack of access, lack of equality. And these are hundreds of millions of people in India, or in other words, hundreds of millions of Indians are being denied and deprived of basic democracy, basic franchise, and basic access to food and shelter and the rest of it. And in context and historically, just in case anyone thinks that we are part of an affiliation to something else, we are not. Modi's mantra has been that anyone who challenges his lies and lying and his corruption and his illegality is part of an international conspiracy against what he claims to be India. It's not his India. It's the India that belongs to the hundreds of millions of people whose rights he is treading on and he is defying and denying. So we are only observing what is going on in India and what hundreds of millions of Indians know is happening, and it is wrong. So what Modi is doing is only partly admitted by the Financial Times, which says, Premier League, Modi renames India's colossal cricket stadium after himself. That's what the Financial Times is saying. And the liar has got the most offensive, abusive posture. And India has got so many newspapers and media outlets, and they're not a single one of them is coming anywhere near telling the truth about the outrage and the violations being committed daily by Narendra Modi. So the Financial Times today has got that heading and that picture, and the actual text underneath that is given a byline of Benjamin Parkin in Ahmedabad and Amy Kazim in New Delhi. And they're saying in the first paragraph, Narendra Modi has renamed the world's largest cricket stadium after himself in a rare move by a living leader to champion projects designed to celebrate themselves. The renaming of the site overshadowed the inaugural India-England match that began yesterday at the world's largest cricket ground in Ahmedabad, Modi's political hometown in Gujarat. Remember, less than 20 years ago, Modi incited, colluded with, and was complicit in the massacre of Muslims. And he remains overdue for trial for crimes against humanity to this day. So the Financial Times goes on. What I've just said is not contained in that piece, but I've just added as a contextual clarifier and explainer. The Financial Times continues, the venue has been rebuilt for 110,000 spectators. Modi has sought to use signature projects, such as building the world's tallest statue, to project himself as India's most powerful leader in decades. Now, let me just say this. When Modi is done, that is to say, when he is fallen, his crimes will be listed in very spectacular details. And they will rise the details, the evidence of Modi's lies and corruption and hatred will rise beyond the highest statue, highest structure he has been allowed to create during his occupancy his illegitimate, corrupt occupancy in that post. It's quite stunning, said Rono Joyshen, a senior research fellow at the National University of Singapore, who said the symbolism, the largest, the biggest, the best, was central to Modi's brand. The renaming of the stadium drew praise from Modi's followers and bemusement from his critics. It's not bemusement, they are lying. The Financial Times is severely understating what is happening among the critics and the opponents of Narendra Modi in India. World's largest stadium dedicated to the world's largest personality. Preeti Gandhi, who is in charge of social media for the women's wing of Modi's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, wrote on Twitter. Now that name is quite significant. Gaurav Pandey, who runs social media for the opposition Congress party, called it the height of narcissism. Page 20. Now that's only the beginning of what is being said in India. The height of narcissism in the biggest, largest populated country in the world. And the item in the Financial Times continues with a different kind of headline. And it's New Delhi Notebook by Amy Kazim. Amy Kazim looks like a Western woman. So India turns to private sector to boost vaccine drive. And she says, this Amy Kazim says, I first arrived in India in the mid-1990s at the tail end of its socialist style license Raj. New Delhi was relaxing control over the country's economic life, but basic amenities, long and monopoly of the state providers were still in short supply. Getting a phone line installed into my New Delhi apartment in an upscale neighborhood in the heart of the capital took about 4 months, and an all-cash facilitation fee. If my cooking gas cylinder was empty, replacing it could take days. Airline capacity was far below demand, but my travel agent knew people at the monopolistic state carrier and could sometimes get a seat released if my work required travel on short notice. I have been reminded of these years while watching the first phase of India's sluggish COVID-19 vaccine rollout, which began in mid-January. So far, India's chronically overstressed and underfunded public health machinery has given just 12.3 million jabs, or around 0.8 doses for every 100 residents. At the current pace of around 400,000 jabs a day, India would need 4 years to cover the first batch of 300 million Indians, health workers, frontline workers, and the elderly, targeted for vaccination by August. And Amy Kazim is praising Narendra Modi. So therefore, as we say, Financial Times is another lying outlet in Fleet Street. And the Financial Times is lying about Britain as well, the British government promoting Boris Johnson in a piece by Diana Coyle in a column called Society. The headline is Optimism about the economy is so important. So it's all fraud. The only thing that the Financial Times is telling nearer the truth is this editorial where it is saying that London should resist the space craze. Any changes to the equal listing rules will require careful consideration. Not space specs. A comprehensive approach that considers financial rules in the round is needed to ensure the City of London as a financial market retains its appeal. Specs may be today's hot fashion, but they're not new, and few are likely to prove enduringly special. Now, to us and to the cause of the victims of genocides and violation of human rights, Financial Times has got today a big read about Burma. But before reading from it, we certainly correctly can predict the contents. And the contents are suitable for the backers of the leader of the genocide of the Rohingyas, Aung San Suu Kyi, because the Financial Times, as part of the so-called respectable wing of Fleet Street or Western printed media, is part of the narrative that despite her leading the genocide against the Rohingyas in 2017, Aung San Suu Kyi remains essentially a Democrat. Now that is a crime in itself, and the Financial Times clearly needs to be prosecuted along with the other Fleet Street outlets and the mainstream so-called media in the West for repeating the genocidist lies of Aung San Suu Kyi, the lies that she uttered from 2017 onwards. First of all, she denied that genocide took place, but then she contradicted herself in the next move, which said that there was no discrimination against the Muslims in Burma. And the third one was that the Burmese Muslims were not Burmese at all. So this coup, as we have been saying from the beginning of the news reaching the West or being advertised in the West, to retrieve and to re-establish the image of Aung San Suu Kyi as a Democrat. That this coup, unlike the others in the past, let's say past 60 years in Rangoon in Burma, this coup was one organized by the supposed victim of the coup. That is to say, this coup has rehabilitated, within quotation marks, the image of Aung San Suu Kyi as a victim of anti-democratic military coup, thus reinstating her as a darling of the West, which invented her as the darling of democracy in Burma. And all her crimes against the Burmese Muslims, the Rohingyas, whom the Burmese Buddhists and the anti-Muslim holders of powerful positions, including the Burmese Buddhist establishment, they deny the Muslims all the rights that the Muslims and any other Burmese citizens and Burmese residents are entitled to according to the international charters, international founding charters and declarations and statements and agreements, many of whom the Burmese state remains signed up to. So this is the introduction to this piece about Aung San Suu Kyi, and I made that without reading the text. That shows the intensity of my knowledge and familiarity with the facts that are the subject of the piece. And the headline is completely untruthful. It says, people power defies the military. It's being posited, that is to say, Aung San Suu Kyi and her so-called campaigning supporters are being posited, that is to say, shown as standing against the brutal military anti-democratic dictatorship. That is a false position, and the false positing is intentional and is intentionally done with the knowledge and expectation which is being vindicated in the behavior of the likes of the Financial Times, that the Western media, like the Financial Times, would be playing as stooges for Aung San Suu Kyi and her genocidist military colluders who are now pretending to be against her and against democracy, while she is pretending to be against their pretend anti-democratic coup. The end result, the net result, the immediate instant result has been that the Western media has swallowed that lie packaged for them by Suu Kyi and the Burmese junta. Junta is spelled, of course, Junta, and it's pronounced junta. It's a Latin word and often used in the media as a group of military gangsters and military anti-democratic kind of couriers of agenda against democracy in normal circumstances. So the main heading, it says FTB greed, Myanmar, and the heading reads, in the shadow of rivalry between the US and China. Notice what they're talking about. They're not talking about Burma. That one is talking about US and China, which means that they are departing from the other narrative, which is that there has been an anti-democratic coup in Burma. But here they are departing themselves from that. And they're saying it's nothing to do with the coup in the Burma. It's to do with the rivalry between the United States and China. And in that kind of hemispheric, influential kind of battle, Burma fully and squarely falls within the Chinese sphere. So remember that. It's not the coup. The Financial Times itself is not talking about the coup. So it's contradiction. Contradiction, serious type. So, in the shadow of rivalry between the US and China, the Southeast Asian nation is caught in a growing confrontation between the junta and a pro-democracy campaign that shows no sign of backing down. This big read is given the byline to John Reed. Big Read is spelled R-E-A-D and John Reed is spelled R-E-E-D. So that's the Burmese lie by the Financial Times. And the lie is, of course, suitable, most of all, to Aung San Suu Kyi, who remains overdue for trial for war and crimes against humanity. For our leadership of the genocidal attack on the Burmese Muslims, massacre of the children, massacre of the innocent people, Muslim people in Burma, and then her repeated denial that it took place, and then her repeated justification for the anti-Muslim, anti-Rohingya hatred by the non-Muslim Burmese majority. Now, the Financial Times piece, the big read so-called, is of course accompanied by two pictures that suit Aung San Suu Kyi. The one in the bottom is of Suu Kyi, and one in the top is of the Democrat kind of campaigner who is wearing a mask and is painted as a Suu Kyi, as a symbol of Suu Kyi's supporters. And they're now, as I said before, painting Aung San Suu Kyi as the heroine again. And this is a piece about Aung San Suu Kyi throughout, and we don't need to read the whole thing. It's corrupt, and it's consistent with the general denial of equal entitlement to international protection if the victims of genocide are Muslims, if the victims of massacre are Muslim. And that is the case with this Financial Times piece. So we say that despite the heavy kind of weight, despite the heavy weight given to the Financial Times, it costs 4 times the ordinary price of the average Fleet Street paper. But price apart, the pretension is very grave. The Financial Times is inaccessible, impenetrable to most ordinary readers. And most certainly it's impenetrable to the gullible 52% of the Little Englanders, even to the others. And the rest of the Financial Times is, of course, we have discussed the Financial Times as lying, propaganda for Narendra Modi and for Aung San Suu Kyi. And here is a piece about China that is written under foreign trade and diplomacy. It's not published under human rights, most certainly not about the Muslims' rights, but Turkish Uyghurs fear betrayal over China. So Erdogan walks a fine line between defending Muslims and securing vaccines. It is written by Laura Pitel and in Ankara. For 5 days this month, Jevlan Shirmehmet and other Uyghur activists protested outside the Chinese embassy in Ankara, where they demanded to know the whereabouts of missing family members in China's Xinjiang province. But on the 6th day, Turkish police stepped in. They prevented the activists from gathering outside the diplomatic mission, positioned themselves outside their hotel, and accompanied them wherever they went. Now, that is the kind of report that should be found in all the Fleet Street papers, and more of the truth should be told about how Erdogan, who is treated here with sympathy in the Financial Times, is essentially not the fanatic that the West usually calls him, nor the fascist that the likes of the Communist Party, Great Britain, call him. Erdogan is a careerist, opportunist liar. And his betrayal of the Uyghur people and the so-called dilemma facing him between defending the Uyghurs and securing vaccines from China exposes Erdogan to the corest of core of his lying, careerist, betrayal, and opportunism. And this brings to a focus the real issues facing the victims of genocide and other violations of human rights, and the torture, starvation, destitution, and displacement that hundreds of millions of people across the world in Asia and Africa face due to the corruption of the regimes, whatever the color, whatever the faith labeling. And Erdogan could not be more clearly identifiable. He has been vying for the top post as the exponent of Muslim statesmanship with Malaysia's Mahathir Mohamad. I first introduced Mahathir Mohamad as a kind of factor that should be treated with more seriousness than he was being treated with. In my presentation in 1981 of the discussion against racism at the UK-wide conference that I had caused the then CRE to organize in Birmingham, December 1981. And like I have just said about Erdogan, I said in 1981 that the Western media's description of Mahathir Mohamad as an extremist Muslim was absolute lies. And it has proved to be so. Like Erdogan today, 2021, I said in 1981 that Mahathir Mohamad was an opportunist political careerist who was exploiting the fact that Malaysia is a Muslim majority country and that the Western media and the Western interests were hostile to Muslims generally. That hostility has not only not waned, it hasn't waned, it has got worse. And in the last 6 months, when France's Emmanuel Macron discovered that the nationalist, racist, anti-Muslim Marine Le Pen was getting ahead in terms of the populist kind of appreciation, he immediately decided to become an anti-Muslim zealot, just in the style of Donald Trump at the end of 2015, leading up to his campaign for nomination for the election in 2016. So Donald Trump was not bothered about stopping Muslims, but making a claim that let's ban all the Muslims was the most potentially explosive, politically opportunistic appeal slogan that he could make and think of, and that's what happened. So in all these cases, and we go back to the characterization of Muammar Gaddafi by the West as an Islamic fanatic. Gaddafi was not an Islamic fanatic at all. And most certainly the Assad family never have been anything other than anti-Muslim in Syria. And yet Assad is being portrayed by the West as part of the extremist kind of threat to the West, extremist Muslim threat to the West. And in Egypt, literally millions of Muslims are being persecuted by the Western stooge imposed as president at the expense of Egypt. And the same is happening in not only Saudi Arabia, but in other smaller countries of the United Arab Emirates. Violations of human rights of the Muslims are taking place by Muslim heads of state and rulers, as is of course exemplified in the still uncertain state, whether she is alive or not, of Dubai's Princess Latifa. And the United Nations has not updated its post about Princess Latifa. And we cannot see anything online about the state of Princess Latifa. So what we are saying essentially on the facts that we have summarized and referenced and referred to here in this edition is this. There are no Muslim extremists in power in any country in the world. In fact, Muslim countries are being misruled by fakers and opportunists and criminals of different degrees, depending on the opportunities they can obtain by engaging in corruption with various parts of the West, including the military industrial complex and its agenda of funding itself by weaponizing largely peaceful parts of the world and making them military hostility zones in order to pocket hundreds of billions of dollars in selling arms and making excuses for selling arms to these countries. And so therefore Aung San Suu Kyi, Narendra Modi, and Erdogan in Turkey, they're only different in degrees. They're all corrupt and they're all guilty of violations of human rights of one kind or another. And the Uyghur Muslims in China are the latest example that even as brazen and as open as the genocidal attacks ongoing against the Uyghurs may be, their champions, such as Erdogan, are colluding with their persecutors and the violators and their genociders. So that's part of that part in today's Diagnosis of Fleet Street. And we shall update on that in due course or due courses. Let's check what the other Fleet Street papers are saying. Well, they're lying, but what lies are they perpetrating? And what words are they using? Daily Mail today, Thursday, the 25th of February 2021, is saying that after Boris Johnson's slow road to freedom gets set for Rishis, that is, Rishi Sunak, the UK finance minister, who is actually hedge fund manager. And they're giving him credit in advance that he's going to launch the spring booster for the United Kingdom. And they're saying, their political editor, Jason Groves, is saying, Rishi Sunak will use a giveaway budget next week to pave the way for a post-lockdown boom. Now that's a pack of lies. Don't want to repeat the contents of the pack of lies, but that is a pack of lies. And as we said, Amber Rudd, who has to disclose, we are saying, not anybody else. Amber Rudd has to disclose the full facts about her relationship with Boris Johnson. That's what we are saying. This is another exclusive within the bigger exclusive. And the corruption based on COVID opportunism is exposed in the behavior in the business tricks by Gwyneth Paltrow, who has launched herself as a business provider of a cure to COVID. Can you believe this? And weirdly enough, the Daily Mail, which itself was guilty of the propaganda it now says it is campaigning against over the child sex abuse surrounding the Nick allegations. It is now saying that Priti Patel demanding MPs probe, that is, investigate the Nick shambles. How can MPs investigate anything? And on pages 14 and 15, two-page spread, they're saying that Tiger Woods was a genius whose life was one long car crash. That's what they're saying about Tiger Woods after yesterday's news about his car crash. And they're saying that Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon were at war. And they've got a piece by the briloped Andrew Neil as well, who is against the SNP. And Sam Leith, the racist, crooked liar, is being described by the Daily Mail as the greatest novelist. He's being called one of our greatest novelists, says technology is the death of clever literary plots. In fact, says Sam Leith, it's made them more ingenious than ever. Now, Sam Leith is a crook. In 2006, Sam Leith actually misstated the campaign that we organized, myself and a few others, handful of others, against Monica Ali and her so-called book, racist, anti-Muslim, anti-Siloti book, wrongly, falsely, brazenly, shamelessly named Brick Lane, by stealing the name Brick Lane, which was a real street, real community, and real people she distorted. So she prostituted herself to the pimps of Fleet Street and pimps of anti-Muslim hysteria. And we campaigned, and Sam Leith was one of the writers, either associated at that time with the London Evening Standard or the Daily Mail. And he had no record of having been a novelist, let alone being one of the greatest novelists. And that criminal distorted the evidence that we published about and against Monica Ali. And now he is being celebrated as one of the English literature's greatest novelist writers. And this piece today in the Daily Mail, given credit for which Sam Leith is being celebrated here in this one, is accompanied by a cartoon denunciation of Jeremy Corbyn. Now, the Daily Mail and the rest of Fleet Street has been totally dedicated against Jeremy Corbyn. Now remember the clear disclaimer we have to add here. We have been the most consistent and fact-based, original critics of Jeremy Corbyn because we believe we have evidence of his not being intellectually fit to lead the Labour Party. Having said all of that, we also at the same time uphold his human rights and his right to be not vilified and attacked by liars. So here, again, they keep coming back to finding any excuse to mock Jeremy Corbyn, to ridicule Jeremy Corbyn, to show him in the worst possible light. And the only reason why they do that is because the entirety of the Fleet Street is following the narrative, the agenda of the anti-Palestinians. We are not a Palestinian organization. The only reference we make to events about Palestine and Palestinians is based on the evidence. And we think on the evidence, we find on the evidence, we know on the evidence, we can show on the evidence, we demonstrate on the evidence that the Palestinians' human rights have been and are being violated contrary to all the international treaties, obligations, charters, declarations, agreements, and so on. And Fleet Street is part of that conspiracy to violate all these agreements, declarations, and statements. The Daily Mail is one main platform for the anti-Palestinians. So what they're doing in the rest of Fleet Street about all these topics that we have either directly discussed, diagnosed, or in context referenced. Now, there is a side war going on over Boris Johnson and his fiancée, Carrie Symonds, on the one hand, and her critics on the other. And Kate Maltby, who was responsible, Kate Maltby is a conservative woman, a conservative bourgeois woman who got herself a platform during Theresa May's regime as Prime Minister in the name of England or Britain. And Kate Maltby fell down the career of a Theresa May cabinet member by alleging some sort of sexual advances made to her by one of Theresa May's then cabinet ministers. I mean, nothing of substance appeared anywhere about the man doing anything wrong. But his political career was over. Now, it's very important for us to point out this one. It is sexual innuendo that did it for that particular Theresa May cabinet member. The guy did far less, far less than Andrew, Brenda's son, is known to have done as the sexual abuser of girls, of course these are all white girls, that were procured for his consumption by the pimp, Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, acting as the pimp in collusion with her then boyfriend, Epstein. So Andrew, Brenda's second son, has committed more crimes against children and against other women than this Theresa May minister ever did against Kate Maltby. But the power of the propaganda was such that Maltby was able to orchestrate a campaign portraying that minister as the villain, as the evil villain, as the devil. And so he fell on his sword. He actually was forced to resign under the pressure of the propaganda orchestrated by Kate Maltby through Fleet Street. So here is Kate Maltby defending Kerry Simmons and saying that the publication of various reports about the role being played by Kerry Simmons as the de facto advisor and controller of Boris Johnson's agenda and activities and priorities, that these facts are, in fact, Kate Maltby is claiming, nothing but sexist or sexism motivated lies and inventions. So she's talking on the I newspaper, page 19 today. What she's saying is, in the My View piece, that's Kate Maltby. And Kate Maltby is saying in this piece on page 19 of today's I newspaper, part of Fleet Street in London, she says the campaign about Simmons' influence is unfair and sexist. Luke hates Oliver, so Luke quit. Oliver hates Henry, so Oliver quit. Henry likes Kerry. Simon likes Kerry. Kerry loves Dylan. Dylan peed on Katie's handbag. Katie hates Dylan. Dylan humped Dom's leg. Dom hates everyone. So this may read like the WhatsApp read about from the sixth form prom committee, that is promenade committee. Instead, it's a summary of the briefings pumped over this week by Downing Street operatives attempting to explain their recent changes in personnel. And as Downing Street meaning essentially the administrative headquarters of the occupant of the post of Prime Minister in the name of Britain. Downing Street, number 10 Downing Street is a misleading name and a misleading title. It's one door marked number 10, which I have visited formally various times as part of putting in petitions that got covered, including on the 4th of May 1991, when John Major was Prime Minister, and I led a delegation and handed in a letter demanding millions of pounds in aid to help the victims of the Bangladesh cyclone that had hit the southern coasts of Bangladesh on 30th of April 1991. 30th of April 1991, and I went to number 10 Downing Street door, not inside, and handed in the letter that I had written, just standing outside, handwritten letter outside in the main Downing Street. And the point is that Downing Street is like a big headquarters, and there are literally hundreds of people working in the department called number 10 Downing Street. To the outside world, people may not realize that. People may actually be misled by the propaganda. They say simple, accessible address of a democratic prime minister. Nothing of the sort. It's an address that you go to and get photographed outside, but even that may be denied now to even myself because of the resurgent racist obstructionism that has been growing in the last 31 years, 30 years. It's on the 4th of May, we shall mark the 30th anniversary of that particular handing in of the petition at number 10 Downing Street. The result of that was that I was given the first item kind of coverage in the main evening news on the BBC television on the 4th of May, 1991. And that visit to the Downing Street was shown live as a video in the first item. And that evening's main news was presented by Clarence. Clarence, is it Clarence Mitchell? Clarence Mitchell. That was the item number 1, and that is the Downing Street. Now, this Downing Street has been populated by hundreds of employees who are supposed to be serving the Prime Minister of the day. And this Kate Maltby piece is completely corrupt and dishonest. And its last paragraph, well, the second but the last paragraph, the paragraph before the last paragraph reads as follows. The real question is whether Finn and Newman, together with colleagues like Allegra Stratton, want to pull Boris Johnson's Conservative Party back from the populist outfit it has become, endlessly picking fights with the likes of Black Lives Matter. In the union unit, Newman will need to build a positive narrative rather than simply exchanging insults with the SNP. If Simmons helps on that course, it will be no bad thing. Although her new job with the Aspinall Foundation will divert her. Aspinall Foundation is a charity. We shall talk more about that later, or in due course, which may not be later in this edition. As for unelected advisors, it doesn't matter if they are the PM's partner or his chief of staff. At the end of the day, we elect the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister alone is responsible for which advice he chooses to take. If we don't like it, we sack him. Now, that is Maltby's idiocy. Maltby is supposed to be part of the Oxbridge kind of background. We shall talk about Oxbridge shortly. And we shall show how shallow Oxford and Cambridge are and have been. As we said, this campaign, this channel, this broadcasting outlet, this broadcasting platform transcends and contributes more than the combined intellectual standards of all the universities in context. And what is happening with the piece in the I newspaper, byline to Kate Moulby, includes evidence of the shallowness that Oxford and Cambridge, Oxbridge constitute and represent. There is in this country, in the BBC, in the mainstream Fleet Street and mainstream other media and the politics and most of the kind of selection of candidates for members of parliament, hold an evil, unaccountable, corrupt criminal hold, excessive hold in posts by the recipients or passagees through the Oxbridge kind of channels. Being Oxbridge linked does not equate or equal to being comparatively more intelligent than the products of other educational so-called institutions. Knowledge, intelligence, and the ability to understand the world and the various disciplines and the complexities of ideas is a product of personal integrity, personal dedication, personal devotion, personal skills and interests, and abilities that are nothing to do with any particular school ties, or university ties, or no university ties at all. Most of the world's thinkers didn't become thinkers because of any school ties or any Oxbridge ties whatsoever. And this is something that goes back to and beyond the times of the Greek greats. And the truth can be extrapolated to cover the rest of the world, not just Greece, but the whole of what is now the Middle East, the whole of the subcontinent of India, what is now Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, and beyond, and China, and Russia. So this is part of the diagnostic find and analysis of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel, and we shall talk more about Kate Moulby in a minute and what she's saying about especially Allegra Stratton in there, because she is promoting Allegra Stratton as the opposite of what Stratton has been. Stratton is a believer in eugenics, in the restriction of the population of the poor people or people in poverty, and so on. So Allegra Stratton is a fascist of the worst kind. And yet here, Kate Moulby in the I newspaper, in my view column, published today, that is Thursday, the 25th of February 2021, is claiming that Allegra Stratton, in advising and working with Carrie Simmons and their particular group of women, is actually opposite to what Allegra Stratton is. That she is trying to save Boris Johnson from sinking into the populist mire, the populist dungeon, that the man actually condemning Carrie Simmons, especially men like Dominic Cummings, are trying to create in this country with the frontage of Boris Johnson. So who is Kate Moulby? Let's see. Now, Kate Moulby the result doesn't include a wiki entry immediately, but there is a short introduction to her. And in that introduction, it seems written in the first person, that is by herself. She says, I am a critic, columnist, and scholar. Okay? She says her primary academic research interests are in Elizabethan literature, and I use my background in Greek and Latin to trace the history of ideas and stories from Homer to Shakespeare. Remember? I've already mentioned those backgrounds, not her backgrounds, but international objective backgrounds. So Kate Mulvey says that she is currently doing a PhD which examines the intellectual life of Elizabeth I through the prism of her accomplished translations of Latin poetry, her own poems and recently attributed letters, and her representations as a learned queen by writers such as Shakespeare, Spenser, and Sidney. And she says she's engaged with the ideas of the present as she is with the past. And currently, she writes a regular column for the Financial Times on the relationship between contemporary politics and intellectual culture. With particular interest in faith, education, and foreign policy, she has also written frequently for The Spectator, The Telegraph, The Guardian, The Times, Literary Supplement, The Times, and The New Statesman. And she goes on to list other things like she has appeared on Newsnight, Question Time, Women's Hour, Jeremy Vine, and all the rest of it. Does she mention the fact or anything to do with Oxbridge? Not yet, not found. But the point is that she is part of the bourgeois kind of bureaucracy and plans and cabals. And she is an accomplished self-promoter. And she achieved the destruction of a minister's career, not because of any immorality on his part, but the craft in her own self-promoting exploitation of genuine people's grievances against sexist male behavior, which she expropriated and exploited and got the man down. She is a liar and she is a criminal who is intentionally engaged in fabricating a series of personalities for herself under the guise of promoting liberal kind of thought, while she is actually being paid for writing lies, and the pairs are almost all of them right-wingers. That is an absolute demonstrated contradiction of this crook. The Kate Mulvey is a typical criminal in Fleet Street, and she doesn't have to be employed full-time. She has got a platform, that is enough, and she has got a platform in more Fleet Street titles than most of the Fleet Street staff members. We shall be diagnosing and updating on Kate Mulvey in due course. Now here is the Times newspaper owned by the biggest criminal, Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox News in America, the New York Daily News in New York, and the Wall Street Journal, which he has acquired relatively recently. And he was, in propaganda terms, in media propaganda terms, the biggest propaganda agent of the biggest criminal hoaxer, Donald Trump, throughout the 5 years that Trump was active in promoting himself. So Rupert Murdoch owns the Times, and the Times is therefore and thereby completely distorted from the status it once had until Murdoch got his hands on it. in the mid 1980s. The Times was supposedly called the newspaper or the paper of records. That is to say, everything published in the Times was true, and if it was on the Times, then it was significantly, substantially of importance. Now, in today's Times, the Times of Thursday, 25th of February 2021, there are two items. One is the schools are told to work out their own exam grades, which is a very significant kind of event if it happens. And on the other is the top music festivals will go ahead, say organizers. And they're here running a picture of the Reading Festival. And there is a very rare event in the Times on page 3 indeed, or item, referring to a very rare event. A child, a teenage girl under 15 from Wales has been asked by the American Embassy to help President Biden's climate change initiative. We shall go to the details of that later. But that's a very rare event. A British child or British kind of non-political person being asked to do anything for climate change or something like that is very rare. And especially after 5 years of Trump's lies and attacks on the child Greta Thunberg, this initial kind of evidence of invitation by the current president of the USA to a child to do something the opposite to what Trump did is very significant in many respects. And they've got in the Times, we look at so there are continuing propaganda for the vaccine, including a piece that the vaccine's California variant is more contagious. What the Times is saying in all the items about the COVID is continuing the lies. It's not giving the information. We have been saying right from the start that the Fleet Street papers are not running the facts, the evidence of what the virus is doing, but the propaganda around the virus. The propaganda is designed to boost the electoral chances and the political kind of reliability that Boris Johnson fronted cabal won. And on page 19, the Times is running a multifaceted contradictory lie for racists and against anti-racists in universities. Now, sturgeon is a fish name, as is salmon. And there is Peter Brooks absolutely making fantastic use of the duo, sturgeon and salmon. One fish is biting the other fish and saying that the stinking fish and the stinking system. Now that is rare. And Ian Martin, who is a Mardukite right-wing liar, he will not waste any time before condemning Scotland, whatever the excuse. And the excuse currently is sturgeon and salmon. And the Times editorial says, that Boris Johnson needs to reform education like never before, but that don't mean education. We shall discuss the uneducated Times in due course, not necessarily in this edition, but suffice to say that their editorial today, Thursday, 25th of February 2021, called education is completely uneducated. And Boris Johnson is called an inveterate liar in a piece on The Guardian, which says, in a piece by Patrick Winter, Boris Johnson is an unrepentant and inveterate liar who feels he is not subject to the same rules as others. Sylvie Berman, the former French ambassador to the UK during Brexit vote, says in a new book. She also claims some Brexiteers, he writes, she also claims some Brexiters, not Brexiteers. He uses the single E at the end of the word rather than double E's. She also claims some Brexiters are consumed with hatred for Germany and are gripped by a myth that they liberated Europe on their own, describing Brexit as a triumph of emotion over reason, won by a campaign full of lies in which negative attitudes to migration were exploited by figures such as Johnson and Michael Gove. Berman, who served as the French ambassador from 2014 to 2017 and has been one of the most senior diplomats in the French diplomatic service, including as ambassador to China and Russia, assesses the British handling of the COVID pandemic as among the worst in the world, alongside that of Donald Trump's in the US and Jair Bolsonaro's in Brazil. She predicts Johnson will seek So the Barman predicts that Johnson will seek to use COVID to mask the true economic cost of Brexit to the UK. Now, this is the first time we have come across anything to do with that book or with that woman. But we have been saying for a long time that the disaster that Brexit is being hidden, covered up by the disaster or the disastrous handling by Boris Johnson fronted cabal of the COVID-19 and associated activities. And by associated activities here, I mean the various policies and the various corrupt deals that Johnson, Hancock et al. Have been making worth billions of pounds with people who have contributors kind of chicken feed like amounts to the conservatives. The depth of corruption of the Johnson fronted cabal government, so called, is truly astonishing, and it will never be known until after Johnson has left office or has been forced to quit as incumbent prime minister because of the endless failures. And Gwyneth Paltrow, I mean, the audacity of this criminal is unbelievable. What does she think she is made of? Is she made of Kohinoor? Indestructible? Tougher than iron? I mean, she is completely way overdue for prosecution for multiple crimes against humanity, against taste and decency. I mean, she's saying she has been accused of spreading misinformation. Let's read that one. It's a piece byline to Matthew Weber in the Guardian. Today, Thursday, the 25th of February 2021. And the first starting opening paragraph reads, Gwyneth Paltrow has been warned to stop spreading misinformation by the medical director of the NHS England after she suggested long COVID could be treated with intuitive fasting, herbal cocktails, and regular visits to an infrared sauna. But Matthew Weber spoils his achievement in that first paragraph by calling her Hollywood star. She's not a Hollywood star. None of them is a star. These are actors. Very different from star. I mean, what is the definition of a star? And this actor has been one of the most corrupt self-promoters, to the point of prostituting herself in the ways she has promoted herself. So a prostitute would not be called a star, would they? The Hollywood star who markets unproven New Age portions on her Goop website wrote on her latest blogspot that she caught COVID-19 early and had since suffered long-tail fatigue and brain fog. Paltrow said that after turning to the advice of a functional medicine practitioner, she was told this was a case where the road to healing was going to be longer than usual. She then embarked on a keto and plant-based diet involving fasting until 11 a.m. every day, lots of coconut aminos, and sugar-free kombucha and kimchi. Paltrow goes on to recommend her brand's Madame Ovary supplement and Sidlip, the incredible herbal non-alcoholic cocktails. She added, I am doing an infrared sauna as often as I can, all in service of healing and the rest of it, which means that all the dedicated studies and investigative, examining, kind of educational probes conducted by thousands of people across the world for finding cure to various illnesses are for nothing. All you have to do is to be like Gwyneth Paltrow. What does she think her actual contents are, or constituent contents are? What is she made of, as I said before? She needs prosecuting fast. And anyone behaving as she has been doing needs prosecuting as well. And they're saying, this is the second paper that is saying that Tiger Woods got in a crash as he was rushing to film a television program. And on page 2, the Beaverbrook lying legacy, the Daily Express is admitting the fact that the Grenfell Tower cladding that was responsible for the massacre of these 72 people is now going to affect the future of others' housing. This is in line with the same forces that have been pushing the agenda of the property speculators through the Daily Mail. And they're saying the same thing about the rights of the property owners. A far cry, it's thousands of miles away from the truth about the massacre of the Grenfell Tower victims, residents. As we have said, the massacre took place because the Grenfell Tower building, which was on fire for hours, killing the people, is surrounded by huge empty space on all four sides, which means that any number of planes, emergency military aircraft, could have been scrambled carrying water, and they could have flooded the entire building many times over, thus saving the people who were burnt alive. That is our thesis, has been the thesis right from the beginning of the 17th of June 2017 massacre, which was live, shown on air, on television, live for hours. There is no excuse for not having the water brought to sink, to flood the building and save the lives of the 72 people, or save the lives of most of the people who were still alive. So the actual truth is being hidden by the conservatives, and in that the collusion and the capitulation to that is being shown by the Labour Party, whether it has been so-called fronted by Jeremy Corbyn before Karma took over, or not. It's the same. The Labour Party has no real alternative answers. There are answers, but those answers are not being mouthed or voiced or represented by the Labour Party, and it wasn't represented by the Labour Party when the so-called socialist carrying Corbyn fronted it before Karma took over. And the anti-tax brigade, the right-wing brigade, is of course being given the blanket promotion by the Express as usual. Now what they are saying they're doing, this is a and on page 11 they're saying that Tiger Woods was agitated moments before the horrific accident. And on page 10 they're saying that Nicholas Sturgeon is the conspiracy theorist, as a result of whose being found out, Alex Salmond will give evidence. That they are now celebrating this, they are enjoying this because the Daily Express is against the Scots and against the Scottish independence. And so whether it's Alex Salmond who is in the spotlight or Nicholas Sturgeon doesn't matter to them. Either of them is bad for the racist anti-Scots Little Englanders. So we shall be talking more about other issues and related issues, and we shall focus on tower hamlets in London, East London, and also discuss the need for democracy and honesty and an end to corruption in the local council and the criminality by the elected post holders. This is coming to 4 minutes to midnight. That is 23:56 hours GMT on Thursday, the 25th of February 2021.